I think that's really what leaders need to do. They need to understand where you're coming from and then take action. It may be I don't agree. That's okay. But at least I understand it.
And you can disagree a little more compassionately, perhaps.
Exactly. You can disagree more compassionately. That's well put. That's right. That's great.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today, we are excited to have Phil Geldart as our guest. Phil is the founder and CEO of Eagles Flight, a company focused on improving individual and team productivity, something that every individual and team that I know is in much need of. So prior to founding Eagles Flight, he was with Nestle Canada, where he worked for 18 years, the last 5 of which he served as a member of the executive team in the capacity of Senior Vice President of Human Resources. He is also the author of several books, including Lead Yourself, Lead Others, 8 Principles of Leadership. Today, he's with us to talk about empathy and its importance on leadership. So welcome to you, my friend. It is so nice to have you here.
Thank you, Cynthia. It's great to be here.
So, Phil, let's start with talking a little bit about your journey into the field of corporate training and leadership, and how'd you get where you are?
It's a long story, Cynthia. Well, it began, I did a lot of Christian ministry with youth and discovered very quickly that they don't like getting lectured at. So stick that in the back of your mind. When I ended up in a corporation, I asked to go into the training department. Because of that experience I'd had, I really enjoyed teaching, the young people. And when I got in there, I realized that adults like being lectured at even less than kids like being lectured at. So I was in a bit of a dilemma in that I thought, okay, I'm supposed to be teaching these folks and they really don't want to listen. They don't really want to learn because it's boring. And I identify with that because I felt it was boring at university. So I created what we currently call experiential learning activities. So they are just very sophisticated games and buried the learning in the game. So I would say to people, okay, you really don't want to be here. And I go, yeah, you're right. We don't want to be here. I said, okay, so how about you play a game with me? And we'll see how it goes from there. So they were, okay, great. So typically each game is designed to teach 1 or 2 principles. And when the game was over, I could then debrief it and people learn for themselves. So that was very successful. And kind of my training career took off from there. And then we just used those programs to kind of drive change and have been doing it ever since. So I think it's more a matter of letting people learn for themselves that I found exciting, which is how I sort of stayed in the industry.
I love that. You'll appreciate this story. When I first took a job as a vice president of human resources in a national organization, about 3 weeks after I started, we had this all hands meeting where everyone came together for this big national meeting. So it was my introduction to everyone. All right. And being a trainer, being a facilitator, I wanted to make a big impact. So I went in and I did this exercise with them. It's not a game so much, but it was an activity, a learning activity instead of lecturing, just like you said. So I got up in front of the room and I did this listening skills thing where you had one person kind of give directions to everyone, to draw this image, and they couldn't see the image. The one person just had to describe to them what to do. And I had done this hundreds of times. And you can have an audience of 100 people and you get 100 different images explaining how clarity is so important. And, there's so many more things to communicate a message. What I failed to do was understand my audience. I was in a room full of engineers. And they were so good at put your pencil at 360 degrees, angled 2, make it 2. And the entire room had the exact image they were supposed to have. And it was okay, lesson learned, learn your audience before you. I didn't make quite the impact I wanted to on that first thing.
Well, you never know. But still, people will prefer that and the learning that you get from it to just being told that they need to be better communicators. So
absolutely. What's the core mission of Eagles Flight?
To make a difference in the lives of people. I think the biggest issue is most training doesn't stick, doesn't get applied. And if you're going to be a leader and you have responsibility for human beings, It's a huge responsibility, and you need to learn how to handle that responsibility as well as possible. So we try as an organization to equip leaders with skills that make them far more effective at releasing the potential of their workforce, which makes a huge difference. So if you work for a great leader, you perform better, you're happier, your home life is better. And if you work for a terrible leader, life is horrible.
Right.
So we try to equip leaders with the skills they need to be really great, which makes a difference in their lives and the lives of the people they work with.
It sounds too like as you're developing the leaders using the tools that you're using, you're also giving them the ability to be able to pull that out of the people they're leading.
It's interesting. Historically, the workforce potential has never fully been released. Even great leaders say, okay, if I give you clarity, off you go, do your job, and you know what to do. But people come to work and they really, really want to be successful. They really want to do the best they can. It's good for the company and therefore job security. And it's also good for their career if they're career minded. So there's this sort of pent up energy within human beings to excel and to do a good job. And unless the leader knows how to tap into that, they don't really get all that's available. They may get good outcomes and they may get good work. And if you're a poor leader, you get poor outcomes, but you don't get the full potential. So if as a leader, I learn how to get that potential, then it transcends not just my work. It goes into my family. It goes into any boards that I'm on or communities or charities. I'm just a better person. So I often feel, folks say to me, well, can you teach those things? Yeah, you can teach them. The issue is less the teaching and more, are you willing to apply them? And I think the power of experiential learning is I'm not telling you what to do. I'm showing you that your current way of behaving is less than optimal. It's probably good, might even be great, but it's not as good as it could be. And you discover that for yourself, which then leads you to say, I think I'd like to get better. So what can I do to get better? And I think that's a very critical thing, especially in today's world, because the workforce of today is far more motivated to excel. They're complicated. They've got many priorities that go way beyond just a job. So leading them is a lot harder, I think, than it used to be 20 years ago.
I love that. And that makes me think of something. I want to see if you have seen this as well. But I have seen some leaders who have this philosophy that I don't want to micromanage them. I don't want to show them what to do. I believe they have the answers. I believe they can do it. And they kind of stay so hands off that they don't give enough clarity and direction of the outcomes they want. So they have really talented people like scrambling to try to do the right thing, and they're afraid to move any direction because it could be wrong. And the leader in his mind believes he's doing them a favor. I'm just going to let you go. I'm going to see who rises to the top. I'm going to see how you think on your own. I'm going to show you that I trust you. But there's a fine line between offering clarity and direction and micromanaging. Agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I think on the one hand, you have a very poor leader who doesn't have a clue how to lead properly. And you have on the other spectrum, well, I understand that people have great capability. I'm just going to let them go do their thing. And they're both bad. The way we deal with that is we teach something called the sandbox, which is you need to provide a sandbox for each of your people that is appropriate in size to their capability so that I can perform to my maximum because my sandbox is large enough, but it's not so large that I feel kind of lost at sea and without direction. And it's not so small that I feel micromanaged. So the real challenge of leadership is to create the right size sandbox, which varies by person and also varies by task. So if I'm a great leader, I get the sandbox right. The person performs and is excited about performing. I don't put the company at risk. And then I spend my time trying to grow that person's sandbox so they can take on more and more responsibility.
That's an excellent analogy. I've also encountered, and I think is kind of common, is leaders aren't really often sure of the outcomes they want. They know they want to get better. They know they want to have better bottom lines. They want to be able to report good things back to the board. but they're themselves aren't that sure and how to do that or how they want to do that. So they want to rely on their teams to do it. So there have to be ways that leaders can expand the thinking of their teams and hear what the teams are saying. We use something like all angles. We call it all angles protocol to get the thoughts of everyone and really make sure all the voices are heard. But what are some other tips that you have for a leader to draw that out without just saying, oh, go run with it. Let's see what you come up with.
It's a great point. And I think your all angles is essentially the way to go. Again, when we teach that to leaders, we start out by saying, okay, who is the decision maker? Which sounds like a really simple question, but in many organizations, it's not clear who the decision maker is. So if I give work to an individual, are they the decision maker or am I the decision maker? Or is someone that, so it's not always that clear. But once you know who the decision maker is, then to your point, that decision maker has got to be able to be sure that the decision that they're about to make that's going to generate action is correct. And the way to do that is to get input from the people who you're about to give the work to. So if you think of an example, if we are about, as I'm about to make a decision on a return policy in a retail store, instead of me making the decision based on what my competitors are doing or what the current literature says, if I bring together the folks who are at the front line dealing with customers, and I say, look, I'm about to write or review our return policy. What are you hearing? What are the issues? What are the problems you have? How do you have to handle returns? I get input from the folks who ultimately are going to have to implement my decision. But that makes me way, way, way smarter because now I understand the realities of the situation. I might understand that it's not just about the policy. It has to do with our IT ability to process returns and so on. So if I do a really good job getting input from the people who are going to be assigned the task, I make a much better decision. When I then assign it to the folk and give them the right size sandbox, they go, okay, we get it. We had input. They maybe didn't agree. Phil maybe didn't agree with our input, but at least he heard us. He's reflected that. And the decision I make is much more practical. So that process that you follow before you assign the task and give the sandbox size, if you put the two together, get the input, define the sandbox, you optimize the opportunity for success and for the person being fully equipped to be really good in the job.
And so let's talk about getting input as well, because you're the leader, you're the CEO, you're in charge, and there's a bias, an unconscious bias from the employee who wants to tell you what you want to hear. So I think that leaders that really want to do a good job of getting input have to really be creative on how they ask for it. Instead of just saying, hey, what do you think? I want to put this together. What's working, what isn't. Just like, tell me some of the things that are failing right now. Like, I really want to hear what's failing, what's not working, because it opens it up and it opens the door to say, yeah, you can tell me the bad stuff too. Make sense?
Yeah.
Resonate?
I think at the core of your comment is the degree of trust between the employee and the leader. And I think initially the trust level may not be as high as you would like. So you start small. And if the individual giving you the input sees that you actually absorbed it and processed it, then they will trust you with more input. So you may not be able to jump right to getting all the input you want the first time, but how you respond to the input will determine how much more you get in the future.
Right. If you take it and totally ignore everything, and they're never going to give it to you again.
Yeah.
So
Or even it's more a matter, I think, of it's not whether or not I acted on your input.
Right.
It's more, did I reflect that I heard it? And here's why I've chosen the course of action I had.
Absolutely. And I think that's a missing part for a lot of leaders. Like, yeah, I heard you, but it doesn't work. We didn't go that way. But we don't go back and share that. Like, this is what you said. Here's why we're going to go this way instead. But I value what you had to say. So in the article, obviously, it was about empathy in leadership. And that's a big topic for me, which is why I created the series. And you talked a lot about the distinction between empathy and sympathy. So can you tell us a little bit more from your perspective in empathy and sympathy?
Eagle's Flight has 5 very distinct values. One of them is genuine friendliness. So Each one is linked to EAGLE, the acronym, but the G is genuine friendliness. When we teach that to people, they say, what do you mean by genuine friendliness? Well, firstly, you've got to be genuine. And secondly, you've got to be friendly. But genuine friendliness is not artificial happiness. It doesn't mean you run around and you're cheerful all the time. It means you genuinely care for the person as a friend. And if they have something to celebrate in their life, you celebrate it with them. And if they have something that's not so good in their life, you sympathize and you commiserate with them if necessary. You care for them as a human being, as a friend. It doesn't mean you got to like them. It doesn't mean you got to be your best friend, but it does mean that we want to respond to one another from where that person is coming from emotionally. And most of the time, 95% of the time, it's good. I'm happy. I had a good weekend. New Year's was great, whatever. And so you share that with them and you move on with your life. So this genuine friendliness is really in another way of saying, I need to be sympathetic to the person I'm working with. I need to be able to understand who they are. I need to commiserate with them, rejoice with them, whatever it is. So it's sympathy tends to be on the, if you had a bad experience, I'm sympathetic. But at the larger way of thinking, sympathetic means you and I are aligned. I'm in touch with how you are feeling and I care. So that's a good thing because human beings should care for one another. Empathy is different in the sense that when I empathize, it means I understand where you are coming from. I am not insensitive to where you are. Now, I may not be sympathetic to it. I may not respond emotionally to it, but I understand where you are coming from. So as an example, if you go back to my earlier example of the return policy, an employee may come and say, Phil, this return policy that you implemented is a pain in the neck. People hate it. I hate it. It doesn't work. Okay, if I'm sympathetic, I go, yes, it's really bad. I'm sorry. It's all. If I'm empathetic, I say, I understand that. I can appreciate the frustration. Here's why we're doing it, and we're not changing. So they go, okay, all right. At least you empathize. You didn't say, well, rough on you, just go do it anyways. You said, I appreciate it. I understand, but we can't change it for the following reasons, and here's what we're going to do. So the person walks away, okay, well, Phil was at least empathetic. He didn't go off and come down and hold my hand because I'm unhappy. What he did is he just simply said, okay, I get where you're coming from. I appreciate it. And we're not going to change it. So empathy is more a matter of helping the other person feel as though you understood them, that you were in sync with what it is that they are bringing to you so that you can respond accordingly. But responding accordingly is different than the way you might respond if you were sympathetic. Because in sympathetic, you would go probably and care versus understand and show that you understand. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes that sympathy happens between coworkers and can create a very toxic work environment because one person comes and complains instead of being empathetic and changing the subject or trying to build that person up, they agree, validate, and now the cycle is even bigger. One of the reasons why the empathy piece became such a thing for me and why I created this series is because I have a book coming out in early spring, and it's called Dark Drivers. And as I was writing the book, it dawned on me that while it wasn't the initial purpose, I think an outcome is going to be a much broader understanding of empathy. Because what dark drivers are is, and based on what my book says, is that they are like hidden memories and experiences and things that happened in our childhood that actually impact how we show up at work, how we show up as a leader. And I use real case studies throughout the whole book. But for example, if you have an employee who's super talented but extremely defensive, and like every time something happens and they're super, super defensive, and no one can figure out why because no one's attacking them, but they just, and so people are walking on eggshells around them. they likely have some sort of dark driver, something that happened in their childhood or at some point in their life where they got embarrassed or triggered in some way, and that's just buried in there. And now to protect themselves, that reaction happens. And through this book, it's to help people understand their own triggers and dark drivers. But now when I look at you, I don't need to be your psychologist and say, oh, you're triggered by something. But I do need to recognize, okay, your body language changed. You got tense, you became defensive. There's something going on. So I'm going to back off. And it's kind of empathy on a different level than just on a task where yeah, that we're going to do it anyway. Because there's the design thinking on system and there's the design thinking on human centric, right? So this is the human centric empathy where I can understand that there's more to you than I see. There's more causing you to react and respond. Maybe it makes you an employee that doesn't follow through, but you're super talented. So, I know there's more going on, so I can ask more questions. I can just have more empathy and understanding because I know what triggers me. That makes any sense?
Yeah, no, it does. Many leaders have grown up and gotten promoted because they were good at managing things.
Mm-hmm.
I was a supervisor on the road crew and I managed the backhoes and so on. But when I become a leader, I have to manage people. But I've never been taught to manage people, so I manage people like things. So if you manage a piece of equipment on an assembly line, it either works or it doesn't work. You either maintain it or you fix it. But unless you've been trained on things like empathy, as a leader, you manage people as if they were equipment on the assembly line. I do this, I do that, you worked, you didn't work, you need maintenance, as opposed to, no, you are a human being. You're not a machine. And the distinction there is I demonstrate empathy to you, which I would never do for a machine. Mm-hmm. But I care about how you feel and where you're coming from and what's in your mind. Okay? I factor that into my approach when I approach you. And I think that is really empathy. Now, if somebody told me something, I don't know, so this is going to open a long can of worms. I don't really want to go down all the implications here, but somebody once told me something that to understand all things is to forgive all things, which is actually incredibly profound. I'm not sure it's 100% true, which is where the can of worms is, but it's 95% true. To understand all things is to forgive all things. If I understand where you are coming from, why you said what you did, what's behind it, all the background that you've had and so on, and you behave in a way that I find inconsistent with how I would behave, I am more willing to forgive you. It doesn't mean I accept it. It doesn't mean I agree with it. It doesn't mean that I'm going to follow your example, but it does mean that I give you forgiveness for something which I might otherwise condemn. Now, you might still condemn it, but I understand it. So the principle there of understanding leads to forgiveness is an interesting one because it captures the essence of empathy. It creates other problems. So if you forget the other problem, I think that's really what leaders need to do. They need to understand where you're coming from and then take action. It may be I don't agree. That's okay. But at least I understand it.
Right. And you can disagree a little more compassionately, perhaps.
Exactly. You can disagree more compassionately. That's well put. That's right. That's great.
So one of the things that I think is I watch like a light switch go on sometimes when I'm working with leaders is I say to them, you have two jobs now. You have your day-to-day making this organization run, and you have another full-time job, which is leadership. And leadership isn't just about managing people. It is about developing future leaders. So now you have to be looking at people differently than just how you're going to encourage them and how you're going to be clear with them to get this task done. It's like in your analogy, the sandbox, how are you going to grow their sandbox? Because that is another full-time job of a leader. And sometimes that changes their thinking enough to make them think on that level.
I would probably expand on that a bit and say the leader's job, the leader has an obligation to the board to release the potential of the workforce. We're paying them a salary.
Right.
And it's a fixed cost. And if I'm only getting 80% of what's possible, then I'm really not doing my job. I have an obligation to get the full 100%. Whether that person, as their sandbox grows and they develop their potential, chooses to move into leadership themselves is a different question. So I see the leader's role is to allow individual potential to be fulfilled, which links to what that person aspires to in their life. Some people may not want to get into leadership. They just may want to be the absolute very best welder the world has ever seen. I think that really is the priority for a leader. Am I releasing the potential of my workforce?
Yeah, I like that. I like the way you put that. That's good. So let's talk about executives in C-suite. That's where I do all of my coaching. I find that the leaders who do the best with executive coaching, the leaders who get the most out of it, are the leaders who are willing to. So they look at themselves as though, how can I be better? They don't look at themselves as what's wrong with what I'm doing. And I think that's as a coach, and I'm sure you've probably experienced this, and a CEO does not want to be told you need to fix this. They got where they are because they're good at what they do. So coaching isn't about looking for something wrong. And I think that's a misconception that people have. It's about like, you're already really good, and I'll bet there's even more talent in there. Let me help ask the right questions. Let me help pull that out. Have you experienced that?
Let me come at your question a different way. We do a lot of culture transformation work in organizations. And when an executive or a CEO comes and says, Phil, here's an area of my company that I would like transformed. We'd like a greater commitment to safety, for example, or we would like our sales force to be more aggressive, or we want to be more customer centric, whatever it is. It's okay. Your organization is behaving in a certain fashion, and you want them to behave in a different fashion. Now, behavior within a company is a byproduct of what leadership does. So I, as an employee, watch what my leader does, and I mimic that. The way they treat customers is the way I treat customers. The way they approach safety is the way I. So you can train me forever, but I learn how to behave by watching my leader. So if you work your way up the chain, at the end of the day, the CEO is the head of the company. The body follows the head. So if I'm having a conversation with a CEO under the heading of coaching, it's less to me about new skills or old skills. It's more like, what outcomes do you want in your organization that you are currently not seeing? And therefore, what behaviors do you and your executive team have to exhibit to get that? It may not be, it's not a matter of good, bad, or more. It's more a matter of, if you want a different outcome, you have to behave differently. Let's codify that and go do it. They go, okay, I get. So you might call it training or coaching, but really it's all designed for the CEO to get the outcomes out of the organization they want, and therefore they need to begin to do things that they haven't been doing before. And that's where you have to hold up a mirror or guide them, and they say, okay, it's fine, no problem, once I understand it. So I think at the senior level, it's more that. I think at the junior level, it's more classic coaching because they don't have the level of experience that the senior folks do.
Well said. Very well spoken. What's your approach to succession planning to ensure that it's holistic and it's throughout the organization, not just limited to top management?
Yep. Great question. I think the answer becomes, you have to distinguish between career planning and succession planning. So, I mean, you were in HR, so you get this, but career planning is I give each employee the tools to allow them to go manage their own career. So if you want to move ahead, you need this experience or you need this education or whatever. So I, as an employee, know the rules whereby decisions are made about promotions, and I can go and do whatever I need to do in order to get the experience or training and so on. Succession planning, on the other hand, is the obligation the executives have to the shareholders to ensure that key positions are properly staffed at all times. So to do that, they have to identify key people who they feel could move into those jobs and make sure that they're ready to go when the time comes. The problem with that is being ready to go inevitably means experience outside of their functional area in some way. Mm-hmm. So if I'm in sales, I'm going to have to know marketing better or finance or distribution or something. So in the development of a person identified in the succession plan, you may want to move a salesperson into a marketing job for a period of time. When you go to do that, the head of marketing says, I don't want that person. They're not a marketer. So, yeah, but I know, but that we need that for the succession. Yeah, well, I don't want that. So you run into a problem. So the solution is at whatever level you are doing your succession planning, you need the decision makers above that level to agree who gets on the succession plan so that in the event you want to move them into an area, you don't run into a glitch. So the head of marketing is saying, okay, we're going to put Betty in sales on the plan if need be, and she moves into marketing, I'll take her. Okay, then we can put her on. You have to deal with that before you put Betty on the succession plan, which is a very healthy activity because it really helps you figure out who the right people are and what Betty actually needs and so on. So I see it much less of an HR function and more of a whatever level you're dealing, whatever level you're dealing with. The HR function has to facilitate a discussion with the decision makers to facilitate that process.
How does empathy fit into that whole succession planning system?
I think that very often, if I go back to my treat people like machines, the folks doing the succession planning make the assumption that people that you are putting on the succession plan want that because they're high achievers or something. Empathy says, no, I need to spend time and understand what those people actually want. What is important to them? Do they want career advancement? Or do they simply want more authority in the job that they're in or whatever? They're obviously high potentials, but empathy would say before I take on the role of just moving them around like chess pieces because they're highly skilled, I should be more empathetic to what's important to them and have that discussion because we just make the assumption they want to get ahead. And they may, but they may not want to get at the pace that I want. They may want to have kids first, or they may want to travel for, I don't know, whatever. So you need to understand where they are coming from as part of your succession planning analysis.
I think that that's so valid. I find that even with my own adult children, right? It's like, well, why don't you want to be in this kind of role? Why are you happy making that amount?
Exactly.
It's like because they're happy and then they're very happy and they're just like, shut up and stay out of their business. And as a leader, I think it's the same thing. I think you're right. So what advice do you have for leaders who just want to develop their own empathy skills, but they don't want to be overly agreeable or a doormat? Like how do you, and they don't want to come across as indecisive. What advice do you have?
I think developing empathy is not something that you can do easily. So short of giving you a 2-hour answer, let me tell you a story. The best leader I ever worked for, who was off the charts amazing, would constantly say when I walked into his office and made a suggestion, I don't understand. Okay. So I told him again, don't understand. Don't understand. Okay. Let me tell you again. I don't understand. So I'm thinking, okay, this guy's got to be like slow or something. But when he finally stopped saying, I don't understand, he then interacted with me on that topic. And he was beyond brilliant. Man, you not only understand, you really get it. And I began to realize that his phrase, I don't understand, was his way of saying, tell me more. I want to hear more about what you think. Explain to me your rationale. Explain to me why it is you think that. He kept pushing to basically require that I give him all my thinking on that topic. And once I'd done that, he had all of my thinking and my rationale and my motivation for whatever. And then he could respond. Like, wow, he really understood me. So that was sort of like empathy on steroids. He would never have called it empathy. But the practicality was, if you say to me, what would I say to a leader who wanted to be empathetic, is listen more. And they go, okay, yeah, listen. No. I mean, listen more. Ask questions. Probe way beyond the point where you wish that you could now jump in and talk.
Right.
Because you have something to say, you want to get it out. Okay, well, don't. Ask for more information. It will drive you crazy. But you will be demonstrating really brilliant empathy. Mm-hmm. So if you understood that principle, if leaders understood that principle, they would be far better leaders and the empathy would come as a byproduct because they would then get to know what the person's thinking. So I think that would be my short response to a complicated topic.
I think that is a fabulous, fabulous answer. There's a thing in a leader's mind that like feels like they have to have the answers. The real answer is, like you said, just really listening and hearing and helping. And I love that. That was a great example, great story. And you're right, that was a great leader. So as we wrap up, is there anything that you want to leave our listeners with today? I'm going to ask you also, is there a particular way you like for people to reach out to you? Is it all of your links that you want listed will be listed, but do you prefer LinkedIn or email? How can someone reach out to you if they choose to?
Thank you for asking. The best place, I have a website, which is philgeldart.com. If you go there, you can get me on any topic, philgeldart.com. So that's the best way to reach out. And no, my only comment would be, I really appreciate the time you've taken on this topic because I think, Cynthia, it is a great topic. I hope your book is hugely successful because I think the leaders of today's generation need to understand the role of empathy and not confuse it with softness and weakness and, well, okay, I just let people do their own thing. I think if they could add that to their toolkit, they would be more effective. And I think we need that. So it's a great topic, and I appreciate you spearheading the effort.
Well, I genuinely appreciate your time. Your article was really well received, and I'm sure that the interview will just add validity and let people get to see you a little bit more.
All right.
As we wrap up another episode of Care to Lead, just remember that leaders who care to lead. For more insights from leaders, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you can also find Care to Lead wherever you get your podcasts. And again, thank you so much. It's been a great time talking to you.
My pleasure. Thanks a lot.